Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back, everybody, to Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. Next segment is Erin O'Toole talking about inflation, prices, and the trucker convoy to Ottawa that is seemingly picking up steam over the fact that they're imposing mandatory vaccinations on the truckers. So, we all have noticed that prices on different goods have gone up, and not just a little bit. When we consider that the price, this may sound simple and kind of out there to people, but when you consider a simple bag of elastic bands, a 1 pound bag of elastic bands goes from $6 a bag at Staples to over $15 a bag in a matter of weeks. That there might be a problem with inflation. When we watch a package of food stuff start to shrink up, but the price remains the same or goes up slightly, we might have a problem. Now, the government has known this for a while, and there have been articles in the Globe and Mail about the BOC trying to decide what to do about interest rates and things to help curb inflation. Some of it has to do with the fact that there have been extreme weather conditions around the world, across Canada, that have had an effect on the shipment of goods. Some of it is that. Some of it is the fact that carbon pricing has gone up, so we might see that at the gas pump. Notice that the gas prices have risen. There are several things out there that are happening that are making cost of living just that much more. And what is the government actually doing about it? And Erin O'Toole is calling out Justin Trudeau to ask him what he is going to do about it. What kind of actions can be taken to help ease the needs of the general public? Along with that, getting back to the truckers, there's forming a convoy to stretch across Canada into Ottawa, where they're going to converge to talk, because they want to talk to somebody about these vaccine mandates. Meanwhile, back at the stores, because these truckers are doing this, that means that they aren't hauling goods. So we're going to see shortages and things like that happen, because if the truckers are protesting, that means they aren't making pickups and deliveries from wholesalers or farms to our local stores. Erin O'Toole was asked a direct question: is he going to meet with them? He says that he meets with the associations. It's kind of a non-answer. So we have this issue of inflation. We have this issue where people are experiencing rising prices. Some of us can get around that if there's available overtime or ways to increase our income. Most of us can't. So the question is, what is the government officials going to do about inflation? What are the government officials going to do about vaccine mandates imposed on the trucks and truck drivers? So let's listen to what Erin O'Toole has to say in this next segment and decide for yourself what it is that you can do for your family.
Good afternoon. Canada's cost of living crisis is getting worse by the day, and families are feeling the pinch. Gas is up over 30%, and people are paying record amounts at the pump. Housing prices are up over 25% and are pricing a generation of Canadians out of home ownership. Rents in big cities are up 20% and squeezing working families who are trying just to keep up with life in many of our big cities. Food and everyday essentials are up 10, 20, almost 30% in some cases. L'inflation est à son plus haut en 30 ans et les pénuries de produits sur les tablettes des magasins vont augmenter les prix. Simply put, life is becoming more and more expensive for Canadians, and they are worried. In recent days, we are seeing and hearing this in all parts of the country. 60% of Canadians say they are struggling to pay for their groceries for their family. Only 34% of Canadians believe that their family will be better off in 5 years. Inflation anxiety, endless lockdowns, and disruption to the everyday life and habits of Canadian families is turning a nation of optimists into pessimists. Most Canadians have done everything they've been asked to for the last 2 years of this pandemic, but they are falling behind and families are worried. They also see no plan from the Trudeau government, no plan to get prices down, no plan to get the economy moving, and no plan to help against the cost of living crisis gripping this nation. Instead, the Trudeau Liberals are adding to the cost of living crisis. They are taking more from Canadians at a time that a majority of Canadians are having trouble keeping up. This government is hiking payroll taxes, making your paycheck fall short from where it was just a month ago. Many people, especially those families who are already struggling, have noticed this tax hike on their paycheck. Last month, Canada's Conservatives called on Justin Trudeau to halt his CPP and EI tax hikes to Canadians. He refused to act. Today, following another increase in inflation to a level not seen in over 30 years, we are once again calling on Justin Trudeau to reverse this CPP tax hike that was forced on Canadians at a time they can least afford to pay more in taxes. Reversing this latest Liberal tax hike will put nearly $700 back into families' pockets this year. Businesses have also warned that this tax hike means they are less likely this year to give Canadians a raise. Les mois derniers, les conservateurs du Canada ont demandé à Justin Trudeau d'annuler sa hausse d'impôt sur l'assurance-emploi et le RPC. Il ne l'a pas fait, évidemment. Encore une fois, nous demandons à Justin Trudeau d'annuler la hausse d'impôt sur le RPC qu'il inflige aux Canadiens. Il faut annuler cette hausse fiscale immédiatement. Here is the reality. The Liberal government does not seem to understand the economic pain that millions of Canadians are currently facing. Families raising young children are seeing costs skyrocket, and they are seeing their taxes go up. Seniors on fixed income, especially seniors who are single living on their own, they're being priced out of their homes in communities across this country at a time of increased isolation and anxiety. With the average cost of a home in Canada surpassing $700,000 and increasing by almost 26% on a year-over-year basis, is it any wonder why more than half of Canadians under 30 are giving up on home ownership entirely. Avec l'hausse de l'inflation, les budgets des ménages est mis à rude épreuve, surtout pour les familles et les aînés les plus vulnérables. C'est aussi la catastrophe pour les petites et moyennes entreprises. Nous traversons une pénurie de l'approvisionnement. En même temps, l'offre des produits disponibles est retardée par une pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Les Canadiens ne s'en sortent pas. Le gouvernement Trudeau laisse tomber encore et encore. Il ne fait rien pour vous aider. Mr. Trudeau constantly talks about having Canadians' backs, but raising their taxes at a time they are struggling is the exact opposite of that. The government is out of touch with the challenges facing working Canadians. Canadians are being let down by a government that is driving inflation and is expecting Canadians to pay more when they have less. It's time for a serious economic plan to get Canada back on its feet and address the cost of living crisis. The government must act immediately to take steps to put money back in the hands of hardworking families and small business owners. Stopping this latest Liberal tax hike would provide immediate relief to Canadians who are struggling with the cost of living, a crisis that seems to be getting worse by the day. There is no reason that the government could not take this immediate step of reversing or at least pausing the CPP tax increase to ensure that it doesn't make the cost of living crisis even worse. We ask the Liberal government to put themselves into the shoes of these families who are falling behind each month. Let's help them get ahead. Let's give them a chance to provide for their families at a time that they're losing hope. An additional $700 for those families is desperately needed to fight the cost of living crisis. Let's act now. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Oui.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Questionné ce matin sur la vaccination obligatoire des camionneurs, M. Trudeau a répondu que 90% des camionneurs étaient déjà vaccinés et que les conservateurs menaient d'une certaine façon une campagne de peur sur les chaînes d'approvisionnement canadiennes. Qu'est-ce que vous avez à répondre à M. Trudeau?
Je suis déçu par M. Trudeau. Il a divisé les Canadiens depuis l'élection. Je vais répéter, les vaccins sont sécuritaires et efficaces. Et on a une crise d'approvisionnement maintenant au Canada à cause d'inaction par M. Trudeau. Et maintenant, il y a une crise du coût de la vie aussi, particulièrement pour les Canadiens les plus vulnérables. Et c'est pourquoi je suis ici aujourd'hui, de demander une annulation d'une augmentation de taxes par M. Trudeau, de donner un autre $700 pour les familles qui sont en train de payer leurs facteurs.
Est-ce que vous appuyez le mouvement de contestation, ce convoi de camionneurs qui se dirige vers Ottawa pour le week-end?
Comme vous le savez, j'ai dit quelques fois, les vaccins sont primordiaux dans notre lutte contre la COVID-19 et on doit trouver les solutions pour la crise dans notre chaîne d'approvisionnement maintenant aussi. Il y a 2 mois, j'ai demandé des politiques pour améliorer la situation avec la pénurie de main-d'œuvre, avec la pénurie dans des produits essentiels. Et aujourd'hui, nous venons de demander une break pour les familles canadiennes aussi. Mais je vais répéter, les vaccins sont primordiaux et c'est très important de s'attaquer à la crise sur la chaîne d'approvisionnement.
Ma question, c'est est-ce que vous appuyez le convoi?
CTV News. A similar question to Louis about this convoy. Several of your MPs have tweeted out support for the convoy. One of them saying that he felt the Prime Minister had a vendetta against people who were unvaccinated. Do you support the convoy, its goals, its objectives, even though the Canadian Trucking Alliance says it could be disruptive? And to follow, again, repeat Louis' question, will you meet with them when they come to Ottawa?
We've been talking to the Canadian Truckers Alliance, Glenn, for several months. We've seen a crisis in the supply chain coming for several months, and we've proposed policies to try and help alleviate that. The most important of which is vaccines. And we encourage everyone to get vaccinated and to get boosted. And how can we use those tools alongside the other tools to make sure that we don't see shortages on grocery store shelves? Because here's the reality. When there's a shortage of products, the costs go up. And Canadians are already 60% worried about paying their grocery bill. So we can't have policies that make that even worse, and we can't raise taxes. So that's what we've been advocating for responsibly the last few months, Glenn, is to try and tackle the supply chain crisis, encourage vaccination, not ignore problems and divide the country like Mr. Trudeau does.
You didn't answer my question about whether
yes, I did, Glenn.
You didn't say whether
Vaccines are a critical tool.
You didn't say whether you meet with them.
And we need
you didn't say what,
to make sure we keep store shelves full.
Maybe you can answer in response to my next question, sir. You can say whether you meet with them.
That's why last week, Glenn, when the policy of the federal government for less than 24 hours reversed on the situation with trucking, the government was floating whether they could actually change their policy to address the supply chain shortage, and they decided not to. I've always said getting vaccination levels up, but also using rapid tests and other tools to make sure products get to store shelves, that's what a government needs to do, and that's what we'll continue to advocate for.
My follow-up question is about the supply chain. One of your MPs tweeted out a photograph purporting to be empty grocery store shelves in Canada. Turns out was actually from the UK several years ago. When things like that happen, does that undermine your party's credibility on this issue?
Well, we've been talking about shortages for some time. So has the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We've been sent photos from people's stores, and people have been anecdotally saying it. I've seen a bit of it myself. We've seen costs go up for meats 20%. We've seen shrinkflation, where people are actually getting less and paying more. So what we have to do to tackle this issue, Glenn, is tackle it head on with vaccines and with measures to make sure we can get products on shelves safely. Let's make sure that we get our economy moving. And this is what we want to see. So we're asking our team to speak to their grocery stores, to their farmers, to their local trucking companies to try and make sure we're encouraging vaccinations and actually tackling the cost of living crisis. And today, my suggestion to cancel or pause the CPP tax hike would amount to $700 that I know a lot of Canadians could use at the grocery stores this year.
Afternoon, Mr. O'Toole. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You and other Conservatives have called for reasonable accommodations for truckers in particular who are unvaccinated and who could lose their job, or and that policy, according to you, could have widespread implications on our economy. But now that there are unvaccinated truckers rolling into Ottawa, you won't say whether you support them. You won't say whether you will meet with them. So what should Canadians think about your position? Do you not support the trucking convoy?
I support getting as many people vaccinated as possible, including truckers. And I've probably, with the exception of a few doctors who are on TV every day, I've probably encouraged vaccination more than any Canadian. And that's our most critical tool to reduce the severity of COVID, but also to get this public health crisis under control. I've also said there's going to be opportunity to use rapid tests and a range of issues to tackle real issues. We have a supply chain crisis right now that is helping fuel inflation, in addition to Mr. Trudeau's spending and other policies. How can we tackle that? By prioritizing vaccines, prioritizing public health, but reducing pink slips and getting goods on shelves. I think that's what governments at all levels have to do.
So what's your message then to truckers who have maybe spent the past month thinking that you kind of have their backs and calling for reasonable accommodations and rapid tests? And again, you still won't answer. Will you meet with them when they come to Ottawa? Do you support their efforts and coming all the way here? What's your message to truckers who might be disappointed that you are dodging questions and when you won't say whether you'll meet with them?
Well, let me be crystal clear. We've been meeting with the Canadian Trucking Association for several months. In fact, we've written the minister on this. And at every occasion, I encourage truckers to get vaccinated. That's the best way to keep supplies flowing And that's how we have to tackle this pandemic. Get as many people vaccinated as possible and also use all the other tools that we have to make sure we don't see shortages on shelves. Because what happens with shortages means prices go up. And at a time we have record inflation, Canadians can't afford that. That's why I'm calling for a break today for Canadian families. But let's be crystal clear. We can advocate for vaccines, but also advocate for people to not lose their house or their home or their livelihood if we can come up with a way to tackle the supply chain crisis in a way that's practical. Mr. Trudeau's government flip-flopped a week or so ago. They attack me with all regularity. They don't provide solutions, and they're raising taxes on Canadians, 60% of which, that's millions of people already saying they're struggling to pay their grocery bills. So let's give them more money in their pockets and let's tackle the supply chain shortage at the same time.
Bonjour, Olivier Ferrand-Boissé de TVA. Je dois revenir sur la question, je n'ai pas de réponse encore. Est-ce que vous appuyez le convoi, oui ou non? Allez-vous le rencontrer lorsqu'ils vont arriver ici à Ottawa? Oui ou non? Est-ce que vous appuyez ce convoi-là?
Pour moi, comme un chef, ce n'est pas pour moi d'appuyer une manifestation ou un convoi. Je suis ici pour le bien-être des Canadiens, incluant les familles à travers le pays, inquiétant par la crise sanitaire, avec la crise du coût de la vie. Et c'est pourquoi, il y a 2 mois, on a proposé des mesures concrètes pour améliorer la crise dans notre chaîne d'approvisionnement, tout en respectant les règles sanitaires, tout en proposant une campagne de vaccination pour les camionneurs et pour tous les Canadiens. Et ça va être mon approche comme leader, des solutions et un break pour les familles canadiennes pendant une crise de l'inflation.
Je vais vous questionner sur un autre sujet. Le Royaume-Uni lève les tests obligatoires à l'aéroport pour les voyageurs qui arrivent de l'étranger. Ici, on teste encore systématiquement tout le monde qui arrive malgré les demandes des lignes aériennes de l'aéroport Pearson. Est-ce que vous croyez qu'on doit poursuivre dans cette façon de faire-là ou on doit modifier la politique?
On doit parler avec les experts sur ça, mais c'est possible d'utiliser les tests de dépistage rapides pour les voyageurs double vaccinés. Et est-ce que c'est nécessaire d'avoir un test PCR pour les Canadiens double vaccinés? Probablement non, mais on doit discuter avec les experts d'avoir un processus sécuritaire et efficace tout en respectant les mesures et la protection des Canadiens en pleine pandémie.
Operator, do we have a question on the phone? Avons-nous une question au téléphone?
Thank you. Merci. Our first question is from Travis Denraj with CBC News. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Thanks for taking our questions. I assume that you knew that you were going to get questions on the trucker convoy today. It just strikes me as odd that you don't have a clear position on this. So I'm going to try again. I know that my colleagues have tried, but why are you unwilling to tell these truckers coming to Ottawa if you stand with them or not? And do you have a position that you will make clear today?
Well, Travis, let me be perfectly clear. As I just said in French, it's not for the leader of the opposition or political party to attend a protest on the Hill or a convoy. It's up to politicians to advocate for solutions in a cost of living crisis, in a supply chain crisis, in a way that's responsible and respectful of the public health crisis we're in. We have done that, Travis. In fact, a few months ago, we advocated for solutions to deal with the trucking crisis and the supply chain crisis in a way that promoted vaccinations, kept public health the priority, but also made sure we didn't have a massive supply chain increase to shortages at a time where Canadians are already paying 10, 20, 30% more for goods. The Trudeau government has flip-flopped a few times, floating things because they're scared to try and find the right balance. They're a year behind ordering rapid tests and other tools for us to actually be able to manage COVID-19 responsibly. So I want all Canadians to know that when we've been meeting with the Canadian Truckers Alliance for the last few months, It's been about finding responsible solutions to the cost of living and supply chain crisis facing our country while also respecting public health. That's what we need, and we don't see any coherent solutions from Mr. Trudeau. And for him to start 2022 by raising taxes, raising payroll taxes on and carbon taxes on Canadians who are already struggling, 60% of Canadians saying worried about paying their grocery bills, that is a crisis, and that's why Canada's Conservatives will fight for those Canadians.
On another topic, Regional Caucus in Saskatchewan voted against kicking out Senator Denise Batters, despite you booting her from National Caucus. What do you think this says about your personal leadership, and does this show there are severe divisions within the Conservative Party?
I don't really mind, Travis. There's Senate caucus meetings, there's regional caucus meetings, we have issue caucuses at times. National Caucus is the one time per week we come together for several hours to chart a course for Canadians. And we won the popular vote in the last election, but we didn't win the seat count. We made some gains and we talked about issues that Canadians were concerned about. And I'm modernizing and reaching out for the Conservative Party to make sure that we win the trust of more Canadians. We tackle the issues. We invite more people into our party, and I'll make no apologies for that. And that's where National Caucus is about people that want to move forward and fight for a strong and united Canada. That is what we will do at that meeting. But parliamentarians are free to do whatever they want in other meetings and advocate for things. I will just focus on Canadians.
Opératrice, dernière question au téléphone. Last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question is from Hélène Bugetti, les groupes de l'information. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour Monsieur O'Toole. Moi, j'aimerais revenir à votre annonce d'aujourd'hui, la hausse des cotisations au régime de retraite. J'aimerais comprendre quelle est votre position à long terme, parce que cette hausse que vous décriez aujourd'hui, elle s'inscrit dans un programme à long terme pour augmenter la couverture des citoyens qui n'ont pas de retraite, comme les fonctionnaires par exemple. Plusieurs disent que c'est pour aider les plus petits travailleurs qui ont des retraites pauvres. Alors j'aimerais savoir, vous êtes contre la bonification du régime des rentes du Canada?
Merci pour la question. En pleine d'une crise de coût de la vie, ce n'est pas le temps pour une augmentation des taxes, incluant sur le RRQ ou CPP. Et c'est pourquoi c'est le temps de travailler en partenariat avec les provinces, de donner les Canadiens, les Québécois, un break à près de $700 en pleine d'une crise de coût de la vie. Et c'est pourquoi je viens de proposer une mesure. C'est possible d'annuler l'augmentation ou d'avoir une pause parce que les changements vont aider seulement un petit nombre des Canadiens dans un autre 40 ans. Mais les Canadiens méritent un break maintenant parce qu'il y a une crise de l'inflation, une crise de coût de vie et nous sommes ici pour le bien-être des Canadiens.
Mais vous dites on peut annuler ou faire une pause. C'est deux choses très différentes. Alors, je suis pas certaine de comprendre votre position. Sur la question du principe, êtes-vous d'accord avec la bonification du régime de retraite des travailleurs? Et donc, est-ce que pour vous, c'est juste une pause ou on l'annule et on ne procède pas?
Merci, Hélène. Comme vous le savez, c'est une question pour le gouvernement fédéral et les provinces aussi. Il y a 2 mois, les provinces, quelques provinces ont demandé une pause parce qu'il y a une crise pour leurs citoyens aussi, la crise de la coût de la vie. Et c'est possible de travailler avec le Québec et avec les autres provinces, de trouver un équilibre pour nos pensions. Mais maintenant, il y a une crise de coût de la vie. 60% des Canadiens, des familles québécoises, sont inquiets avec leurs finances, avec les facteurs pour épicerie chaque mois. Et c'est pourquoi on doit agir immédiatement d'aider les familles québécoises, les familles canadiennes. Merci beaucoup.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.